Nothing is certain in American politics, right? He's an idiot. It's pointless to try to convince him of anything. He's gone off the rails. We're in crazy town. Trump is unfit to be president. One of the problems with Trump, he doesn't try to unite the country. He tries to divide it. He's the most dangerous person for the presidency. He's a fascist to the core. Trump doesn't really care. He cares about himself. So whether it's India or whether it's Europe, whether it's Africa, you name it, it's not about Donald Trump, so it doesn't interest him. If Trump became president, he would just wave Putin in to Kyiv. Just go ahead and take it. Why? Because Trump worships autocrats.
In the midst of this election cycle, legendary journalist and writer of books like All the President's Men, which dealt with the Watergate scandal, Bob Woodward, has a new book out called War. It deals with Joe Biden's presidency and, of course, how he dealt with the ongoing wars in Ukraine and Gaza, but also the last couple of years of his term in which we saw a decline in his health and a mounting challenge from Donald Trump, who happens to be the subject of 4 of his previous books. So Bob Woodward is the best person we can talk to about the factors that have defined this election and why he writes that Donald Trump is not only the wrong man for the presidency, he is unfit to lead the country. He goes on to say in his book that Trump was far worse than Richard Nixon and probably a criminal president. To talk about all this, I'm very happy to have Pulitzer Prize-winning author and journalist Bob Woodward joining us. Thank you so much, Mr. Woodward, for speaking to us at the Hindustan Times. I want to start by saying that, we're all, by the time people see this and read this interview that I'm doing with you, everyone will know who's won the election. I just wanted
only maybe, because it may take a long time to count the votes.
If we have a George Bush kind of situation you're talking about.
Yes, well, we've learned over the decades nothing is certain in American politics, right?
That's true. But if you could, because I think that you've written so many books about presidents over the years, if you could paint for all of us outside, what would the world look like with either of them? What would it look like with Kamala Harris as president? And as you've written, you've not spared Donald Trump and what potentially he could do, the potential damage he could do as president. What would it be if he came back to the White House?
Okay, let me answer about Trump first, if I may. And I've got some notes here that summarizes the people he chose to work closest to him, people who had spent their entire life defending the country, say the following about Donald Trump. The former Chief of Staff, General John Kelly, who was a 4-star Marine officer and became Trump's Chief of Staff, in other words, running the White House. This is what Kelly says about Trump. He's an idiot. It's pointless to try to convince him of anything. He's gone off the rails. We're in crazy town. Former Defense Secretary James Mattis, definitely one of the most respected people in the U.S. military. He says that Trump is unfit to be president, and the problem, or one of the problems with Trump, he doesn't try to unite the country. He tries to divide it. Former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Mark Milley, now Trump appointed him to that top military job in 2019. Milley says of Trump, he's the most dangerous person for the presidency. He's a fascist to the core. So these are the people closest to Trump who say that he's irresponsible, that he cannot be trusted with the presidency. You can't get a stronger picture of who Trump is. And one of the things I've discovered, and I've spent 7 years on Trump, my judgments are the facts that I found as a reporter. This is not a partisan political judgment. What we find about Trump is he's driven by instinct. He does not want advice. He does not believe in democracy. He doesn't believe in the Constitution. He doesn't even believe in truth. The last year of his presidency, I spent 9 hours interviewing him about how he handled the coronavirus. It could not be more irresponsible. He could have saved hundreds of thousands of lives just by having a plan and taking care to protect the people. He just kissed it off. He said, don't worry, it's going to go away.
Well, your words couldn't be clearer. And I want to I have a follow-up question about this, that, people like you, other people who are experts speak so clearly about him. But before that, I just wanted you to also give us your opinion about Kamala Harris.
Harris, the vice president, has been to presidency school. She's been going. President Biden makes sure that she's in on all the meetings and the discussions. She has a good team. There are example scenes I have in my book, War, where she literally goes behind the scenes to find out in a meeting with the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. They talk about what's going on in the Middle East, particularly in Gaza. She's very upset about it, and she tells Netanyahu that he has to do something. Then she goes out publicly and says the conditions in Gaza are unconscionable. I will not be silent, she says. Very, very strong.
So is it, the sense I got from your book and these conversations that your reportage had, was that there seems to be, even in the handing over, if from the Joe Biden to Kamala Harris, even though they're both Democrats, there is a change in the way America is viewing Israel as an ally. Is it fair to say that?
Well, I mean, the whole relationship with Israel is very complicated. But what's important, and this is the contrast to Trump, Trump doesn't care. He only does what he wants. He doesn't listen to advice. He doesn't deal with facts. Kamala Harris does. She has a national security advisor named Phil Gordon, who's one of the most respected, experienced people in the U.S. government on foreign affairs. Now, it's true, she's been vice president for a long time. She's learned a lot, but she's not had the power yet. And we will see. But there is a path to for everyone in government, for you and I as journalists, a path to learn and listen. And Donald Trump does not want to learn, does not want to listen. Kamala Harris, though inexperienced in many ways, is somebody who's listening and learning. That is essential. You and I know in our business, we are always learning. We have to listen. We have to be curious. We have to have a team that is working with us in our news organization. You can't do it alone. Trump tries to do it alone.
I wonder if you can help me, Mr. Woodward, in getting to a really micro thing of saying that, I think every country is trying to figure out which one of these two candidates will be good for their country. Now, here in this particular election, there's this added angle of Kamala Harris actually being partly Indian, of being of Indian descent, and of course we know how Donald Trump made such a big race issue about that. But Donald
But
Trump also has.
exactly, the idea that he tries to take somebody's background and who their parents were and grandparents and make that an issue, there could not be anything more irrelevant. Anyway, go to your question. I'm sorry, you triggered
No,
me.
sure. No, but I just wanted to know that, he seems to have a lot of following here in India as well because of his what he says about migrants and, his whole right wing and populist agenda. Is there any insight that you have? Because I know that you visited India as part of a journalist team covering Obama. Is there any sense that you have on which of these regimes would be something that India would be more willing to do business with India?
Well, not specifically India, but any country. Trump doesn't really care. He cares about himself. So whether it's India or whether it's Europe, whether it's Africa, you name it, it's not about Donald Trump, so it doesn't interest him. Harris is, as I said, got some staff people who know what they're talking about. She is a listener. She listens to people. And that is the variable. And let's be realistic about where we are now. We are in a dangerous period of instability. We need forces that will be calming, that will kind of make the system more rational, make the government more rational, make the world and the U.S. participation in that world more rational.
So, one of the things I wanted to ask you, Mr. Woodward, is towards the end of your book, you talk about the contact that Donald Trump, out of office and in the last years, has had with Putin. Now, could you tell us a little bit more about these revelations that you make in your book and the potential implication of that?
Well, he loves Putin. I mean, he says it. He says it publicly. He said, "I like Putin. Putin likes me." And just last week, there was a question about contacts he had with Putin, and I raised those questions in my book. And just recently, Trump says, "Well, I'm not going to talk about I'm not going to answer questions about Putin. But if I did have contact with him, it'd be smart." Now, I mean, what a thing to say. He's not going to talk about it, but if he did it, it would be smart. And, as I report in my book, this new revelation that Trump is giving Putin expensive equipment for detecting the coronavirus. He gives it to Putin for his personal use. These are expensive machines. This is a system that Americans need. Oh, he's giving it to Putin, and he says, "Don't tell anybody." This was in 2020, while he's president. He's just giving these, and Putin says, "Well, don't tell anyone," because Putin knows people are going to be mad, and Trump says that he doesn't care. So I report this in the book. Trump, of course, denies it. Then, to my utter surprise, the Kremlin comes out and confirms it. I'm now putting the Kremlin on speed dial so I can get their reaction to everything that happens.
So when Trump claims that he can solve the Ukraine Russian standoff, the war, do you believe him?
Well, look, it is such an important war, and it hundreds of thousands of people have been killed. This is not something you're going to do solve right away. The National Security Advisor to President Biden has said if Trump became president, he would just wave Putin in to Kyiv. Just go ahead and take it. Why? Because Trump worships autocrats, people like Putin. And he says all these nice things about Putin. Now let's be historic about this. Who is Putin? He's the Hitler. He's the Adolf Hitler of our century. The attack on Ukraine is one of the most savage attempts at territorial conquest. And Putin thinks, oh, Ukraine doesn't exist. Well, of course it exists, but he wants it not to exist, wants it to be part of Russia. This is one of the calamities going on in the world, but it's been going on for a couple of years, and it's not on people's screens. They don't see it. It doesn't come out in the news regularly. But what's going on there is what Hitler did in the last century.
You know, as you mentioned earlier, that Kamala Harris has been sitting in for some time in Joe Biden's meetings, whether it's with Netanyahu or with other world leaders, and she does the tough talking. She knows her subject about it. But do you think, and I've been following American news reports, the sense that I get is till recently, a lot of the people weren't aware or didn't think that they knew her well. Do you think that that has been a big challenge for the vice president?
Well, of course, but I'm able, because I have the time to work on these things. I describe a scene July 25th, just a couple of months ago, where she had a meeting with the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. And she was tough in the meeting, but it was and I have the notes so you can see exactly what happened. And she's saying to him, look, the conditions in Gaza are unconscionable. There is one toilet for every 4,000 people. Can you imagine the conditions they're living in Gaza? Then, to her credit, she goes out in public at a press conference and says that these conditions are unconscionable. And then she says, I think, a magic phrase: I will not be silent. I am not going to not tell the world about what I know. And she does it. So she's got a spine. There's some bravery there that she's demonstrated that I found in my reporting for this book.
You know, your words, you're unequivocal about the problem with Donald Trump, and as bystanders standards as well, and witness outside, we can see that as well. But this is a journalistic question that I wanted to ask you, Mr. Woodward, that, you know, covering and writing about Trump, and it seems that whether it's in America or the world outside, things have become so polarized that It doesn't matter if you write the truth, if you talk about the fact, what happened on January 6th at Capitol Hill, that they have their supporters, both sides have their supporters, and they feel that anyone else, that a lot of Trump fans will just read your reporting and say, well, you're biased, or they'll think that that's fake news. So in such circumstances, do you think that journalists have to redefine their work, or do they continue to do, despite the fact that it may not be, the truth may not be changing things as much as we'd like it to?
I've been lucky. I've been able to do this for over 50 years, report on 10 presidents going back to Nixon, and there actually are facts. And we can see those facts in the way Trump behaves. And the core question always for a reporter is, does this candidate, this president, this person figure out what the national interest is for the United States? Not for him, not for her, but there is something called the national interest. And here it is to look out for the country, to stabilize as much as possible. I report in my book that President Biden refused to send American ground troops to the war in Ukraine, kept the situation so it was between Ukraine and Russia. We gave we're still giving billions and billions of dollars to Ukraine. They have bravely defended themselves with our assistance. But by keeping the U.S. ground troops out, it keeps us out of that war, because somebody like Joe Biden, who's 81 years old, remembers Vietnam. And in Vietnam, the United States, it's unbelievable, not too many decades ago, sent 500,000 troops, U.S. troops, to fight in a foreign war. By keeping us out of foreign wars with our troops, he protects the United States and serves that national interest.
You praise Joe Biden quite a lot in your book. What I found amazing and what you write about is that all of us woke up to his deteriorating cognitive status this year. It became a story. But you write in your book that it was even in 2023, mid 2023, that people were surprised at how he was acting in meetings. How do you think he managed, if he had these challenges with his mental state of health, that he managed also to be able to, was it just a good team that he managed these two wars at two fronts?
Because that team is excellent. And I go into great detail about the people who work for Biden in the White House, his national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, the deputy, John Feiner, the CIA director, Bill Burns, incredibly experienced, Tony Blinken, who is the Secretary of State, and in many ways foremost, Lloyd Austin, who is the Defense Secretary. And I show scenes of Austin being really, really tough with the Russians. And so having a team like that is central. We learn in journalism. You can never do anything yourself. You've got to have a team. I have Claire McMullen, my assistant, who's sitting here. Really should put her in the chair here, but she knows more about this and can calibrate the information we have in a way that, quite frankly, I can't. So what do we get in the Biden presidency? We get a real team working together. Harris has a team she's putting together. I mentioned her national security advisor, Phil Gordon, somebody steeped in foreign affairs issues and so forth. Who's Donald Trump's national security advisor? His mouth. He just, whatever comes into his head, he will say.
Yeah.
It is
And we
so,
heard the not very complimentary things his team members have told you about him. You mentioned journalism. I have to ask you this, Mr. Woodward. Were you disappointed that your paper, Washington Post, refused to endorse Kamala Harris as a candidate?
yes,
Because
I
it's become a
was.
story across the world.
Well, I was disappointed they didn't endorse. The Washington Post is a strong institution. The reporting side has developed extensive information about who Trump is. It should be supported by the editorial page.
I wanted to ask you, you are so critical of Donald Trump, and yet how do you, I mean, this is obviously, I'm trying to learn the tricks of the trade that you use, but you get all these people to speak to you. And Trump obviously is still speaking to you after all these years and all these books. So is there a secret to that? What would you tell younger journalists who,
Well,
who are keen on doing this?
I spoke to Trump for 19 interviews the last year of his presidency for 9 hours and proved how irresponsible he was in dealing with the coronavirus. It is a moral felony as far as I'm concerned, and it's all available. All the uh, interviews were recorded with his permission, and he was warned that it was coming, that it was going to kill hundreds of thousands of people, and he kept ignoring it. And listen to that, and you will see who Donald Trump is. And I go back to that question of the national interest. He's only interested in the Donald Trump interest, not the nation's.
So it is possible, even in this polarized world, to have everyone speaking to us, even if we are critical of them.
Well, I have, again, I say I have the luxury of time. I've known some of these people for decades, and you can get a full portrait, and the portrait is full of, make no pretext that I know everything. I don't. I always am humbled by what I don't know, and there's always part of the story. But this is I've done this, as I said, for 52 years. This is as complete and accurate a story as I believe I've ever been able to find.
My final question to you, when you write your stories and all your books, then you quote the principles in them as if you were a fly on the wall. And of course, a lot of this is classified, so you wouldn't have been there. But how are you able to precisely quote them, including the F words that Joe Biden may be using? How are you doing that?
But I am doing it because I have good sources, and the rule is I will only quote somebody or explain what happened if the source is firsthand, was there, or whether there are documents or notes to support it. And it's possible to do that in a court of law in the United States. You can take the witness stand and under oath say, I heard this, I saw this, I was there. That's exactly what I'm able to do with my sources.
Bob Woodward, it is such a pleasure speaking with you, and
Thank you.
your book was so insightful. Thank you for speaking with Hindustan Times.
Thank you.
Thank you.